COVID deaths in the UK now exceed those from Italy. And we're going to be presenting a little bit more evidence today that COVID-19 is not natural. We've got some more really excellent research that have been done by some people I'd like to highlight and see if I can explain that to you. But it's day 104 here of our reporting so far, and I'm going to show you why I keep going. I keep going because of letters like this. This came in today in our email inboxes for Adam and myself. It says here, Chris, my wife is the administrator of a municipality-run 156-bed long-term care facility. After watching a couple of your earlier videos on the honey badger virus, the home made a tough call in January, ordered $30,000 worth of PPE, that's personal protective equipment. She faced a lot of blowback from staff because it was a lot of bucks to be spending because of something over in China. Hey, congratulations on doing that. That was a tough call, I know, but also the right one. Good leadership. They also reviewed and updated their pandemic protocol. My wife is also part of a group with the administrators from the other local long-term care facilities and was encouraging them to get prepared. They didn't heed her at first, but turned her once the seriousness of the situation became evident. As a local counselor, I contacted our emergency manager again back in January, asked if they had run pandemic scenarios. Only on paper was the answer, but got him motivated to start reviewing plans. The results? Our county has one of the lowest infection rates and deaths from COVID-19. No long-term residents in our area have been infected with the virus. On a personal level, I went to Costco again back in January, loaded up for bear. I thought the place would be overrun. Doesn't everybody have access to this information? But it was strangely normal. I dumped my stocks prior to the markets cratering 10 days later. Next week, back to Costco, and again the week after that. We encouraged our kids and extended family to do the same, but few heeded us. And these are all blacked out because I was asked to keep this person's name and identifying information out of the story, so I even blacked out their county. The week after our third Costco visit, the lights went on for the rest of society and store lineups became crazy, and there was no toilet paper to be had anywhere. I could go on, but I wanted you to know that there is a lot of people in this part of southern Ontario that owe you a huge debt of gratitude, and they don't even know it. I knew you were onto something when Wikipedia deleted you, and YouTube kept messing with your subscribers. I realize some days it can be tough to soldier on, but you need to be aware that your message is being widely heard and acted on. Thank you for alerting us so early so we could prepare. Now, if we can just get them to admit to messing with this virus and why. Kind regards from Dave. P.S. Please share the story if so inclined, but do not use any identifying names, last names, etc. So, Dave, thank you so much for that. And for everybody else who sends in stories like this, this really is what keeps me going. It's obviously, with this channel demonetized, I don't have any monetary incentive to do these things on YouTube. I don't have any other particular reason to be making all of this effort and work that I do public, except that I get letters like this, and I know it's having an impact, and it's really important. And because I can use my gifts as somebody who can understand these things and translate them in a way that more people can hear them, I'm going to keep doing that. So thanks, Dave, for that, and for everybody else who sent in letters like that. Really appreciate that. All right. Coronavirus. Britain passes Italy to register the highest death toll in Europe. Britain has become the European nation hit worst by the coronavirus, overtaking Italy with a death toll of 29,427, and Italy standing at 29,315 as of last night. So, this is thank you from Dr. Adam. Dr. Adam didn't give me permission to use his last name, didn't say not to, but we always default to discretion whenever given the chance. So if you want us to use your name, you got to say so. Otherwise, I'll call it out like that. But thanks for sending this along. And by the way, this was just using the official statistics. And it turns out that the UK, if you use, and to continue in this article, they also point out that, well, this is the official statistics, but if you kind of count excess deaths above the recent 5-year average, you find this huge gap here. And this also really has to be tacked on to COVID. So, but look at that. It's more than a doubling. That's how severe it is. So, if you're of the camp that says, hey, we're overcounting COVID deaths, I think the excess mortality figures say we're undercounting them. And more, however this shakes out, I think we can also say that the UK with Boris Johnson, and, he got sick with it. Of course, I think he changed his tune after he had a really close run with that, ended up in the ICU and all of that. But at the beginning, Boris Johnson and a lot of the UK leadership was really poo-pooing this, downplaying it, sort of blithely tossing around this idea that maybe they should just, get to herd immunity as quickly as possible. And you can see the effect of that strategy right here. That's 55,000 excess deaths that wouldn't have happened. Honestly, a fraction of those would have happened, but most of them wouldn't if a competent strategy like we saw in Taiwan or in South Korea or in Singapore had been conducted. And remember, a while back, we had this guy, Bill Mitchell. He showed up on this daily reporting twice because he was really poo-pooing this whole thing, calling it scare tactics and saying that, this isn't, he didn't really believe that this was a real thing. It was just the flu, all of that stuff. So all the way back here on the 24th of March, he says, hey, to his readers, for the past week and a half, I've had what I call flu light. On a scale of 1 to 10, maybe 3 out of 10. Low energy, little sore throat, little headache, little body aches, breathing maybe a little labored, but no chest pain, no coughing. Anyone else? And then here on April 29th, look at that, full month later, I've had this flu light for more than a month now. It's like a summer cold that just won't go away. Gets better, then comes back. You never feel really sick, just funky enough to be distracting. No temper headache, so not concerned about COVID-19, just an annoying little bug. Then on April 8th, so a week later, a little over a week later, I've had this damn flu light for over a month now. Just when I feel I'm better, it comes back, or back it comes. That's right, Bill. That's exactly one of the symptoms that you get from COVID is that it cycles and it sticks around and it keeps coming back. But sometimes you notice the cycles are getting worse and worse. Higher highs, lower lows on this whole thing. Symptoms. Doesn't feel like you have the flu, feels like you're catching the flu. A little tired, a little icky, a little drained, no temp, no sore throat, slight body aches. Well, here on May 4th, he tweeted out, guys, I just found out I have a saddle clot in my left lung. This is very bad. Please pray hard for me. If I don't make it, I love you all. Bill, I hope you're okay. I haven't seen an update since I haven't gone looking for one, but I don't have an update beyond this. A saddle clot is a bad one because that one that will come out the pulmonary artery and will saddle that pulmonary artery or branches from the left to the right lobes, and that sits in that saddle right there. So that's a really dangerous clot to have. People can go from okay to being deoxygenated literally in seconds with that if it's a complete occlusion. So, Bill, I hope you're doing all right. But this, I think, really shows the progression of what COVID is like. And this was in somebody who was very much a COVID, it's just the flu denier, if I could call him that, for a good long time. I wonder if his tune has changed now. We got a lot of interesting stuff coming out of autopsy results. And so in Basel, a pathologist really did the deed and did a lot of autopsies. Thank you, Dennis Teglis, for this, sending that in. And I keep hoping that we're going to get a lot more autopsy results. Thankfully, this doctor has done that. We now have the results from those. A lot of autopsies are not being conducted because I think, at least in part, the pathologists are afraid to do these things. Not this doctor. This doctor is doing his job. So far, 50 people from the canton of Basel-Stadt have died of coronavirus. The canton of Basel-Land recorded 32 deaths. Alexander Tsankov, head of autopsy department at the University of Hospital Basel, together with his colleagues at the Basel-Land Cantonal Hospital, performed an autopsy on 21 deceased people. We are simply doing our job here, says Tsankov when asked about media reports from Germany, where people are saying he's a hero for doing this stuff. And he's saying, I'm just doing my job. But thank you for doing it, Dr. Tsankov. The pathologists, they've gained important insights from the autopsy of the deceased. The disease, they write, takes place in the smallest vessels in the lungs and in other organs. If these vessels can no longer function properly, clots form, explained Tsankov. Because it's actually their job to keep the blood liquid. I'm not sure what that sentence means. This is a translation out of Swiss German. Due to the blockage of the bloodstream, the blood is now practically still. If the patient is now ventilated, the oxygen gets into the blood, but it's no longer distributed in the body, And this is ultimately what leads to death, as happened with the 21 patients who the pathologists from the region examined after their death. However, only a few would have shown signs of pneumonia. So this whole idea that this is a SARS is a severe acute respiratory syndrome. So that acute respiratory distress, ARD that we would see, is actually not the proximal thing. That's the distal symptom. The proximal symptom is their lungs are clogged with these microthrombi, with these clots that are everywhere. Bill's got a clotting disorder here, it turns out. So this thing ultimately, now that we can see COVID for what it really is, it's more of a clotting disorder. It's more of a blood disorder than any specific lung disorder, something like that. This will confer a whole new avenue of treatments. You don't put people on ventilators and all of that. Now they need to go on anticoagulants. They're probably going to need to go on all sorts of like steroids and other anti-inflammatories, and you're going to be wanting to do everything you can to dial back that cytokine storm and the inflammatory cascades, all those sorts of things. So it's not surprising that we've seen clinical results come out that were very favorable for things like vitamin C, which is a strong antioxidant and can help mitigate that oxidative stress that happens in that whole cascade. A lot of work with blood thinners coming out that's an important treatment modality as well, all of that. But those are all treatments. What we'd really like to do and what we'd really like to see is how do you stop this virus before it gets to the point where you have to mitigate its worst effects. That's where you want your antivirals to come in early. You want them to come in and stop this virus from replicating as early as possible and for as long as possible to tail out that beginning part of its replication cycle in your body so that your body can begin to mount its own defense. Because how do you ultimately get cured from any virus? Your body fights it off, right? That's how that works. Even when we give a vaccine, that's not something that is a cure that's being given to you by science. That's science giving you a piece of protein or other antigen that your body can then recognize so that it can mount the effective defense. So it's always true that your body is what fights off any viral thing. So you want to give your body as much time as possible. How would you do that? Well, here's hydroxychloroquine. Seems to work in Spain. So May 5th, this just came out yesterday. Early hydroxychloroquine. Early, I like that. You give it early. Of course you give it early. Why do you give it early? Because that's when the virus is beginning its replication cycle. That's when an antiviral would do the most good, of course. Is associated with an increase of survival in COVID-19 patients. This is an observational study, so it's not a double-blind, placebo-controlled. Still waiting for those, but they're coming. What did they do here? They enrolled all 18 to 85-year-old inpatients from Central Defense Hospital. So everybody went in. So that's better than picking and choosing, of course, who were hospitalized for COVID-19 and had a definitive outcome. So they were either dead or discharged. So they tracked them all the way to did the patients die or were they discharged? So they tracked everybody through what you would call some sort of a resolution. They're either out of the hospital or they've died. They used a statistical survey analysis to detect treatment differences associated with in-hospital deaths. So people would get different treatments. They're age dependent, of course, severity dependent, things like that. And of course, everybody's got their own case study analysis. So some people are on different medications. So anyway, they used a statistical analysis to try and sort of tease those apart. What did they find? They analyzed the first 220 medical records. 166 patients met the inclusion criteria. 48.8% of patients not treated with HCQ died. 22% of those treated with hydroxychloroquine died. So that has a p-value of 0.002. So that's a very significant finding. 48.8% died versus 22. So that's a good finding. According to the clinical picture at admission, hydroxychloroquine increased the mean cumulative survival in all groups from 1.4 to 1.8 times. This difference was statistically significant in the mild groups. We're going to say mild cases up here. They broke the cases into mild and severe, of course. What they found, which we would say of course do, is that hydroxychloroquine had much, much less of a benefit and it was not statistically helpful in a severe group. But of course, the virus has already replicated. It's already virally loaded the body. It's already doing lots of damage. And that's not when hydroxychloroquine works. So they confirmed that, which is not a surprising finding here for us. What's interesting, though, to find this very, very significant difference, p value of 0.002 between those not treated and those treated with hydroxychloroquine. Remember, remdesivir, which got slammed through the NIH, and with all those conflicted NIH people on the panel, and with Dr. Fauci really being a main cheerleader and pushing remdesivir, they had an endpoint in that study, which was death. They were looking at death as the clinical endpoint, and they were looking for a result like this, which would have shown a statistically significant difference between patients treated with remdesivir versus not treated with remdesivir. And they changed the endpoint halfway through the study, which is a no-no, honestly, now that I've looked at it in greater depth. You don't do that, but they did it. And what they did that because they were finding that people treated with remdesivir had a slightly shortened not slightly, but a statistically significantly shortened stay in the hospital, but mysteriously didn't have any better outcome overall when it came to death. So it's kind of weird that people would get better sooner, but then of those that didn't get better sooner, they died at about the same rate. So it kind of a messy thing. But at any rate, if remdesivir showed a super powerful statistical benefit like this, believe me, you'd be hearing all about it in the news today. It'd be on CNN right now. It'd be all over the news. It'd be everywhere. For some reason, I'm going to bet the news was a little silent on this one. Hey, and hydroxychloroquine seems to work in France too. This is a Didier Raoult study. A lot of people in this one also came out yesterday. Early treatment, there's that early again, treatment of COVID-19 patients with hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin, a retrospective analysis of 1,061 cases in Marseille, France. Not super crazy about how this study was set up, and here's why. 1,411 patients confirmed COVID-19, okay, from the 3rd to the 31st of March. 350 excluded, okay. So 94 whose data was already published, okay, I'm okay with that. 256 with contraindications to HCQ and or azithromycin treatment, refusal, or other reasons. I don't like the other reasons. And the reason is there could be bias. They could have been people who the doctors would have said, don't feel like I want to include these people. I'd rather that it was all people are enrolled, right? Even though they found that a bunch of people didn't meet the inclusion criteria. I mean, I get it. You're not going to obviously enroll people in a study who have contraindications. I just don't know what these other reasons are right here. So let's just keep a little. We'll just keep a little reservation on this for now. But given what they found, let's take a look at what they found. And the reporting out of 1,061 treated with hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin for at least 3 days. And 56 of these were asymptomatic contacts of documented cases. So I'm not sure what this means, confirmed COVID-19. And down here we have asymptomatic contacts. I'd have to read deeper into the study. Honestly, I didn't have time. Ran out of time today. But I'm going to hope that we're going to read into that and find out that these 56 had nasal swabs and a PCR test and were determined to have COVID. And then they had 1,005 symptomatic patients, so they've already shown up fully symptomatic. What did they find? All right. So they were 46.4% male, mean age kind of young, 43.6 years. The age range was 14 to 95 years. Good clinical outcome and virological cure were obtained in 973 patients within 10 days. So that's 91.7%. Were cleared in 10 days. Prolonged viral carriage was observed in 47 patients, that's 4.4% of them, and was associated to a higher viral load at diagnosis with a p-value of 0.001, so that was fairly significant. So the ones who had prolonged viral carriage, meaning that they had detectable virus in their systems for longer, was observed in people who had a higher viral load at diagnosis. But viral culture was negative at day 10. Okay, that's interesting. All but one were PCR cleared at day 15. A poor clinical outcome, P-clin-O, was observed for 46 patients. That was 4.3% of this sample study. And 8 died, which is 0.75%. All were 74 to 95 years old. So this is, depending on how serious the people were, that's actually a very good finding, just 0.75% death. That's much, much lower than we're seeing up here, where they had, it was differencing 48.8% and 22% death. Down here, they've got it all the way back down to 0.75. All right. All deaths resulted from respiratory failure and not from cardiac toxicity, so they didn't die from the treatment. Cardiac toxicity would have been the thing you might expect from azithromycin and hydroxychloroquine, so they're saying that wasn't it. 5 patients are still hospitalized, 98.7% of patients cured so far, and the the poor clinical outcome was associated with older age, severity at admission, and a low hydroxychloroquine serum concentration, so maybe they weren't absorbing it well. So at any rate, still, these would be great results if it was remdesivir. And remember, chloroquine, we've known about this since 2005. Thank you, Nicole, for sending this along. She's a nurse and said, just remember this, Chris. And I was like, oh yeah, great finding here. 2005, published in the Virology Journal, chloroquine is a potent inhibitor of SARS coronavirus infection and spread. Severe acute respiratory syndrome, so this is SARS Classic, is caused by a newly discovered coronavirus. No effective prophylactic or post-exposure therapy is currently available. We report, however, that chloroquine has strong antiviral effects on SARS-CoV infection of primate cells. These inhibitory effects are observed when the cells are treated with a drug either before or after exposure to the virus, suggesting both prophylactic and therapeutic advantage. In addition to the well-known functions of chloroquine, such as elevations of endosomal pH, and the endosome is where the virus comes in and gets released into the cell body, so perhaps raising the pH of that endosome confers a protective function, doesn't allow the virus to escape. The drug appears to interfere with terminal glycosylation of the cellular receptor, angiotensin converting enzyme 2, ACE2. This may negatively influence the virus receptor binding and abrogate the infection, with further ramifications by the elevation of vesicular pH, resulting in the inhibition of infection and spread of SARS-CoV at clinically admissible concentrations. All right. So that's pretty good. Way back there in 2005, so this was known about. Obviously, if you have data like this, and this is in vitro, but certainly what you would have done post that is you would have tested that in vivo, in whole animal studies to see if that was the case. And you would say, wow, this stuff really works. Here's the point. If we had this sort of data, there's no way we should be fumbling here in May of 2020, right? 15 years after this, fumbling along, wondering, slamming hydroxychloroquine and saying it doesn't work and saying it's got a lot of toxicity, even though it's a really safe and well-tolerated compound with many tens of millions of doses under its belt. All right. There's no way we should be, at this point, confused about it. We should have all the data we need. Does it work or does it not work? Well, here was early data, as early as 2005, saying it works. All right. Hey, we are going to look into this natural versus non-natural thing now really quickly. Remember, the difference between a mutation and an insert. This is a mutation, taking that T to a G. And these little 3-letter combinations, this is an RNA string right here. Each one of these 3-letter blocks is read by a ribosome to make a protein. And as it's reading along, it reads each 3 of these. They're like little symbol sets. And each 3-letter combination tells the ribosome what to do. And each 3-letter combination will either code for an amino acid, or it will tell the ribosome start here or stop there. That's it, you got. And these little 3-letter combinations called a codon. So each codon tells the ribosome start, stop, or please assemble this amino acid into the chain, right? So I want to look at that really quickly. And remember, I updated this chart a little bit just to make it a little more accurate. I realized when I was talking it through yesterday, I could make it better. When a mutation occurs, it could be nothing happens. That is a silent mutation. And if a silent mutation happens, well, nothing happens, right? It's just silent. It doesn't do anything to the virus, doesn't make it any more, any less transmissive, any more, any less lethal, doesn't do anything to it, right? And there's a lot of those. And so there's 2 types of silent mutations that can happen. We're going to talk about those really quickly so we can get to the meat of this next argument. And in the jargon speak of all of this, it would be called what's called a synonymous mutation. Let me help you decode what that means. So here are all these codons here, these little 3-letter buckets. And in the first position, you could either have a uracil, right? CAG, right? So these are the four nucleotides that that make this into RNA. And here you see them across the top, UCAG. So if you had a U, and then in the third position, a U, 3 U's in a row, that would code for the amino acid phenylalanine, right? What if you had UUC? Well, you'd still end up with phenylalanine. So it turns out that you can have a couple of these conferring both UUU and UUC, right? UUU and UUC are both saying to the ribosome, hey, get me a phenylalanine and park it into this chain of amino acids. So what would be an example of a synonymous or a silent mutation? That would be if this U right here, see this U at the end here? If this U became a C, you know what would happen? Nothing. But when we're reading the genetic code of this virus, and we saw UUU, and next time we were reading it, we saw UUC, that would be a silent or a synonymous mutation, okay? And some of these, like valine, there's 4 separate codon chunks, 3-letter symbols here that could give you valine, the amino acid valine, GUU or GUC, GUA, GUG, all that stuff, right? So remember when we talked about that 614D became G, that was over here with aspartic acid became glycine. So it would have been, notice that GAU gives you aspartic acid, GAC gives you aspartic acid, but GGU and GGC both give you glycine. So it would have been this A that got changed into a G. That would not be a synonymous mutation or a silent mutation. That actually caused that mutation when you switch out that A here in the second position for that G, that changes the amino acid from aspartic acid, in this case, to glycine. So that's a big deal. And here's why it's a big deal. So the Batwoman of Wuhan, she was probably a person who's most closely associated with whatever happened in the Wuhan Virology Institute. And so she releases lots of her and got some of the figures from the United States on a bunch of papers where they go into the bat caves and then they find bats and they get bat droppings and guano, and then they scour through those things and they try and find new viruses, and they're looking for the source. Like, what give us from one of these horseshoe bats, is there a virus, a coronavirus we can find that is an exact match to the SARS classic or to any other thing? And they're looking for viruses that can jump into humans and all of that, right? So she goes out and she publishes everything, right? And it was on January 20th of this year of 2020 when all of a sudden this rat TG13 sequence was suddenly released by her in a paper talking about it, which is really odd because it was claimed to have been gathered, I think, back in 2013. It was like the closest one. And so it's really odd that she didn't publish this until very recently. And because this would have been a big find, and it would have been something you could have written lots of papers about and gotten like tons of splashy press about, all of that. So at any rate, for whatever reason, this thing doesn't get loaded up into the database until January 20th, and then ding, it happens to look a lot like it's the closest thing in the database right now on a sequence homology basis to COVID. All right, so here's the thing. There's this is nerdhaspower.weebly.com. There's an article in here really well done, exploring the idea that maybe this rat G13 is actually a fake, that maybe this got faked. And here's some of the evidence for that. And I'm just going to pull out part of this, and I hope I do an okay job explaining it. So, as viruses are out there replicating, they get mutations. Mutations just pop up and come along, right? And most of them are synonymous or silent mutations, meaning this U becomes a C, and guess what? It was an accident in transcription, And so this U becomes a C, and nothing happens, right? So because of how this is all stacked out, most of the time when you swap one thing for another, because there's like 4 of these, like there's 4 different things, right? You could have 4 mutations that could occur in here, and you would still end up with proline in this particular case, right? So because of that, the odds really favor the idea that most times when you have an accidental, this becomes a that, or any of these second positions would change, and if obviously that wouldn't do anything. When you have that, most of the times, odds are you're going to get a silent or synonymous mutation. So here, what they're looking at is a synonymous versus non-synonymous, comparing. These are 2 ZC45 is a coronavirus that got found and sequenced. ZXC21, another one. And so when they're comparing these 2 against each other, because these are 2 fairly closely related coronaviruses, and you start looking along their codons. Remember, a codon is a 3-letter grouping, and you start asking the question, how divergent are these 2 from each other? You'll notice that you see a lot of these you see a lot of these synonymous accidents that come along, these mutations, right? So these synonymous mutations don't do anything. This is in the green line. They're accumulating, reading along, hundreds, 200 codons, 400 codons deep, 600, 1,200 codons deep into this genome. What you see when you compare this one to that one is a lot of synonymous and then some non-synonymous mutations. And these mutations lead to actual changes in the amino acids that get expressed in the protein strings. And there's normally about a 5-to-1 relationship at the end here, okay? And this is how they look. They both sort of trundle along, and they go up, and they plateau for little periods of time. But they're plateauing are coincident with each other. But generally speaking, they're both going up. Now, what do you see when you take SARS-CoV-2 against its closest relative with 96 point whatever percent homology? What do you see when you start looking at the synonymous versus the non-synonymous mutations? You see the synonymous mutations are climbing along here, pretty as you please, but for some reason, you get this big flat line right there. And so this is a really odd finding that you would have this big long stretch of flatness. And by the way, these 2, the ratio is getting badly out of whack. The ratio is really badly out of whack right here. And so what's the theory? What's the thesis? Well, either somebody made rat TG13, that's the fake thing, or SARS-CoV-2 was the manufactured virus. One of those 2 things seems to be the case because of this data right here. So looking at the synonymous versus non-synonymous, the final ratio is correct here. So somebody got the final ratio correct when all was said and done, but they couldn't quite manage it across the entire, get the mutations across the whole thing correct. So if they were trying to sort of engineer this, and the best guess I would have is that rat TG13 isn't a real virus. The fact that it popped up in the database on the 20th of January of 2020, and the fact that there are no actual live sample of that has been delivered anywhere. You know what it takes to get a sequence into the database? You got to type a bunch of letters. And I think somebody typed a bunch of letters for rat TG13, loaded it up, and as a means of explaining where SARS-CoV-2 might have come from, because otherwise SARS-CoV-2 has nothing that's anywhere near it on the evolutionary tree. So that's piece of data number 1, something really fishy about this rat TG13, and it's contained in this flat stretch right here of looking at the synonymous versus non-synonymous mutations. That looks really odd to me. I agree with the author of this. That's really fishy. Here's where things get super fishy. So there's a bunch of different proteins in any virus, and in SARS-CoV-2, it's just like any virus, has a bunch of proteins. Has the S protein. We've talked a lot about that, the spike protein, right? Comes in 2 subunits, S1, S2. And it also has some of these other structural proteins that are just sort of in the viral envelope and things like that. And one of those is the E protein. Okay, the E protein, it's not really super important. It's not like it's a structural protein, but it's not like the spike protein with a RBD, the receptor binding domain, right? That's super important. That has to be super highly conserved. It's really like if you have mutations in that, they're typically very unfavorable. That's the way that sort of works out. But the E protein, who cares, right? A little bit. So you can actually, what virologists do is you look at some of these proteins that aren't all that important and you see how far apart, how divergent they are over time. And it's almost like a clock that gets, that's running, because over time, every virus is going to begin to accumulate both the synonymous and non-synonymous mutations, right? Those silent and not so silent mutations, right? And, but it doesn't really matter in something like an E protein here, which is structural protein. So they tend to show up a bit more. Here's the crazy part. This is where things get super crazy. The alignment of the E proteins of bat and human coronaviruses shatters the notion that the Wuhan coronavirus came from nature. While the early copies of Wuhan coronavirus share 100% identity of the E protein with ZC45 and ZXC21, those two other coronaviruses, and rat TG13. See this? Here's a SARS-CoV-2 sample that was taken on February 11th. It has exactly all of the 100% of the same letters in this string here, right, of amino acids right here as ZC45, ZXC21, all right, and TG13, right? All identical, 100% identical. Crazy, right? You know why it's crazy? Because this virus, SARS-CoV-2, is really diverse, genetically very distant from both of these two. It has, I don't know, like maybe 85%-ish homology with them overall, but it has 100% in this E protein. Here's where it gets really goofy. On April 9th, when they sample a version of SARS-CoV-2 on April 9th, so some time has passed, the evolutionary clock is running, and we're already starting to see some drift here. Where was it? Oh, no, wait. The first one here is April 17th. Look at that. April 17th. There's a V where an A used to be. On April 13th, all of a sudden, there's an F where the S's, these are all S's. All of a sudden, there's an F there, right? Let's see when I can circle it with this one. Yeah, so there's a mutation there, right? Here's a mutation here. April 15th, here's another one. An R where all those L's had been. And April 15th B, here's an L where all these P's had been, right? So what we found, what these people found and what they noted here was that all of these things had been separated allegedly by really, really far on the evolutionary tree, like really far. Many distant branches out there, and they had 100% sequence homology, but all of a sudden, you just give a few more weeks and SARS-CoV-2 is out there in actual nature. And next thing you know, bing, 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 4 mutations show up in an E protein, which you would expect. You're going to get those non-synonymous mutations. They're going to show up as part of the molecular clock that's running. So isn't that odd that somehow SARS-CoV-2 had managed to diverge from its really distant relatives and had somehow allegedly been naturally out there in the world evolving, hadn't picked up a single mutation in the E protein, which nobody cares about. You can have all kinds of mutations there and it doesn't really matter that much to the virus. And then all of a sudden it comes out into the real world and starts mutating like crazy. That's really solid evidence that that one of these things was probably a template for COVID-19. Not an actual legitimate distant relative. So that was also pretty interesting finding there. All right, to get back on track with, anyway, I'm just curious about this stuff. So it's a fascinating story to have it develop. I'm going to switch back to vitamin D. Vitamin D levels. Interesting report came out yesterday. It says, hey, it works. This comes out of India. Vitamin D level of mild and severe elderly cases of COVID-19. Here's the table. I got a chart that's going to sort of put this table down into a more easily digestible view. Somebody made a chart out of it, which was very helpful. So they're looking at vitamin D status. Do you have over 30 nanograms per mil, or do you have under 30 nanograms per mil. And out of all of the patients here, they noted, things people in this group where you had over 30 nanograms per mil. Not a huge study, but overall they had 34 patients with it with higher loads of vitamin D. 21 of them were men, 13 were female. 10 of them had chronic kidney disease, 12 had hypertension, 9 had diabetes, 3 had none of those things. 13 were mild cases and 21 were severe cases. So that was the outcome there. If you had under 30 nanograms, out of 142 patients, 102 were male, 40 were female. So a lot more. Is that a lot more compared to that? I don't know. I'd have to do the math on that. But it looks like a lot more men were showing up here with less vitamin D. 41 with kidney disease, 37 hypertension, 59 with diabetes, 5 with none of those things, 11 were mild, 131 were severe. So this is what the two groups look like. This is the under 30 group. This is the over 30 group. But here's the punchline. This is what it looks like. Vitamin D status. If you had over 30 nanograms per mil of vitamin D, you had a mild outcome compared to a severe outcome. That's how your charts look. But if you had under 30 nanograms per mil, this is what your prospects look like. The p-value on that, very significant. So not a huge study, but this is the kind of data I've been saying for a long time. I want this data to come out. I think people ought to be gathering all of this data. You should be pulling blood from every patient. We should be analyzing it for all the macro and micronutrients, but zinc would be in there. Who knows? Maybe it's magnesium. Maybe it's selenium. Maybe it's certain levels of hormones. Don't know. But this is where the big data would really come in handy. But for now, vitamin D, that's got to be part of your personal daily care. So make sure you want to have plenty of vitamin D in your body. I'm taking 5,000 units a day myself of vitamin D3. Hey, how do we return to our ordinary everyday lives? Well, everybody's got to wear a mask, and that's how this goes. Everybody wears a mask. And we've been through this over and over again, but I just want to say that if we want to return in my country, the United States, to a more normal life, the only way we can do that until we have our arms around this COVID thing is for everybody to wear a mask. And as well, we need to have very aggressive programs of decontaminating surfaces like railings that we see here. And remember, if people are coughing and sneezing, even with a mask, some will escape, but it'll fall to the floor. So your shoes, remember, you want to decontaminate those as well. Conclusions for today. Hey, first up, please keep sending Adam and I your stories of how you took early actions or late actions or any actions at all. We don't care. And you got to remember to state if you want your name to be used, and we'll use it when sending in links and stories. If you don't, tell us. Our default, of course, is complete discretion. Hydroxychloroquine, hey, it works in Spain and France so far. Still waiting for those gold standard randomized double-blind trials to complete, but they're out there. They're being run. Can't wait to see what happens with them. But the anecdotes are really piling up right now, and the studies that we do have are really starting to say there's a very significant effect from that. The rat TG13 sequence is ultra fishy. It looks kind of made up to me. Either that or COVID-19 was made up. I don't know which of them was, but one of them was. And that's what the non-synonymous, synonymous mutation chart would tell us. And that E protein from SARS-CoV-2, hey, now it's happily mutating despite somehow having 0 mutations from ridiculously 0 distant relatives. That's just not possible. That's silly. Silly talk. All right, I want you to remember to resubscribe and please hit the like button if you can. It helps us a lot. If I put a lot of effort into these, so it's not asking too much for you to move your mouse a little bit down and to the left and click the like button. That would be super helpful. And you got to remember to resubscribe because we just keep getting all of these things. This is just yesterday. Aaron saying, heads up, YouTube had slowed showing me your latest podcast. Just checked because I had my latest COVID-19 update for you and was totally unsubscribed. People are getting no push notifications. Goog doesn't show anything. So frustrating. So yeah, I know we're out here promoting hydroxychloroquine as an idea because it's cheap and effective possibly. And I know that doesn't really float the boat of the big pharma companies out there and people like companies like Google and YouTube and all of that. So I guess that's it. I don't know what it is. I mean, listen, we're just coming out here with data. We're basically just recapping the news. And somehow we've run afoul of whatever it is that Google, YouTube, and Twitter really want to promote, and we don't understand it. But it is what it is, and we're going to keep doing what we do. Remember, plant a garden. That's going to be one of your most important things. You got to do that. You plant that garden because we think there's food shortages coming. But it could be we've been outed. Randamu Show said, I have a conspiracy theory. This channel is actually a gardening channel. Just look at that tree up here as a display picture. We've been caught out. This is an ultra deep fake gardening channel. So we've been had. All right, people. That's all I got for today. Thanks for listening. We'll be back tomorrow. Bye.
Hi, folks. Adam Taggart, co-founder of Peak Prosperity, here with good news. In his daily videos, Chris often refers to the book that he and I wrote, Prosper: How to Prepare for the Future and Create a World Worth Inheriting. It presents a practical model for living with greater resilience, and those who read it and followed its advice were much better prepared for the coronavirus outbreak than the average household. Given its heightened relevance to the turbulent times we now find ourselves in, Chris and I want everyone to benefit from this book's formula for better, more secure living. So we're giving the book to you for free. To get your copy, simply visit peakprosperity.com/freebook. We think you'll find this an extremely valuable and inspiring resource for the current COVID-19 outbreak and for being well positioned for any kind of crisis that comes our way in the future. Thanks for listening and happy reading.